Blown head gasket, overheating, oil leaks, these cars are plagued with unreliability, recalls, and problems. We're going to go over 30 of the worst engines ever made. Number 1. The Vega's 2.3-liter 4-cylinder engine. This was supposed to be GM's crowning achievement, but instead it became the perfect example of how a great concept can go terribly wrong. At first glance, you might think an overhead cam aluminum block was a bold move for the 70s, and it was, but it was paired with a cast iron head, which is kind of like trying to make a gourmet sandwich with expired bread. They just didn't quite complement each other. One of the biggest problems with this engine was the decision to ditch cylinder liners. GM figured they could save some bucks by making the pistons ride directly on the aluminum cylinder walls. And look, maybe that would have worked in a lawnmower or a chainsaw, but in a car engine, it didn't take long before the cylinders were scuffing like a kid dragging his shoes on a gym floor. Especially in cold weather, when the engine wasn't warmed up and the oil hadn't started flowing properly, the wear started almost immediately. That led to lots of oil burning and eventually a one-way ticket to the junkyard for most of these cars. The radiator, or lack thereof, was another head scratcher. GM originally thought the engine might not even need a radiator, thinking aluminum's heat-dissipating properties could carry the load. Eventually, they settled on a tiny one, roughly the size of a lunchbox, which couldn't keep up with the cooling demands. Overheating became a common issue, which only made the engine's lifespan shorter. Number 2. The Chrysler 2.7-liter V6. Let me tell you, this thing was a masterpiece of bad design. We're talking sludge buildup like you wouldn't believe. Oil turning into a thick, nasty goo that clogs everything up. The problem? Oil wasn't flowing right. And when that happens, you're looking at engine starvation, which is just a fancy way of saying your engine's about to call it quits without any warning. And as if the sludge wasn't bad enough, Chrysler decided to put the water pump right inside the engine itself. You know what happens when that water pump goes? Coolant leaks into the oil. This coolant mix just made the sludge problem even worse, turning what was already a ticking time bomb into a full-on explosion. Many folks ended up facing costly repairs or having to replace the entire engine before they even got close to high mileage. Number 3. The Chevrolet 2.2-liter OHV inline-4 engine. This little workhorse found its way into vehicles like the Chevrolet Cavalier and Pontiac Sunfire. While it got the job done, it had its fair share of quirks that left drivers scratching their heads. This engine had a knack for blowing head gaskets, leading to coolant leaks and overheating. If left unchecked, this could cause significant engine damage. Many owners found themselves frequently topping off coolant or facing costly repairs. The 2.2-liter was known to sip more oil than you'd expect, and leaks weren't uncommon. If you weren't vigilant about checking oil levels, you risked running low and causing engine failure. Drivers often experienced rough idling and a noticeable loss of power. These misfires made passing emissions tests a challenge and could lead to more extensive engine problems if not addressed. Number 4. Cadillac V8-6-4. Now, Cadillac had this big idea back in the day. Let's make a luxury car with a fuel-efficient twist. So they rolled out this V8 that could cut down to 6 or even 4 cylinders depending on how hard you were pushing the pedal. Sounded like a great way to save some gas, right? But in practice, it was like trying to run a 3-legged race with a partner who had 2 left feet. The cylinder deactivation system just couldn't keep up. There were hesitations, rough idling, and these awkward lurches as the engine stumbled between cylinder modes. The onboard computer, which boasted about being able to handle 300,000 calculations per second, was simply outmatched by the chaos going on under the hood. The rocker controls and throttle were a hot mess, with delayed reactions that left drivers tapping the gas and praying for a smooth response. So instead of innovation, Cadillac ended up with an engine that made people miss the days of plain old reliability. This move really hurt Cadillac's reputation. They were trying to lead the charge with innovative tech, but what they got was a PR disaster. They went back to the drawing board soon after, but the damage was already done. The V8-6-4 was a one-year wonder, and not in a good way. At the end of the day, Cadillac pulled the plug on this Frankenstein's monster of an engine after just a year. Number 5. BMW N63 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8. Not everything that glitters is gold, and this engine's got more problems than a middle school algebra class. The N63 was launched in 2008 to power up those sleek BMW luxury models, the kind of car you roll up in when you want everyone to know you've made it. But it didn't take long for folks to find out this V8 had a dark side. One of the biggest headaches? Oil consumption. I mean, the thing burns through oil faster than I can down a cup of coffee on a Monday morning. Some owners had to refill every 600 miles. Turns out it's got this hot V turbo setup, which basically means the turbos sit in the middle of the engine, creating a sauna under the hood. All that heat burns off the oil like a frying pan on high, leaving owners to constantly top off. And that's not even the worst of it. Ever have your car start shaking and coughing like it caught a cold? Well, thank those lovely fuel injectors. They tend to fail, causing rough idling, sluggish acceleration, and even that charming black smoke out of the tailpipe. Each injector isn't cheap either. Gonna cost you around $350 to $850 a pop. Oh, and don't get me started on the timing chain failures, especially in the early models from 2008 to 2014. Number 6. Mazda's infamous 1.3-liter rotary engine, the so-called Wankel that powered the RX-7 and RX-8. The Wankel engine sounds great on paper. Compact, lightweight, and capable of high revving thrills, but the apex seals on this thing are notorious for wearing out faster than you'd expect. These seals are critical for maintaining compression, and when they go, you're looking at power loss and sky-high oil consumption. Speaking of oil, this engine loves burning through it. We're talking about needing to check and top off your oil more often than you'd refill windshield washer fluid in a regular car. Not exactly a low-maintenance relationship. The RX-8 in particular has a poor cooling system, which just makes those apex seals wear out even faster. Repairing them isn't cheap either. You're looking at a bill anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000 just to fix the seals. With that kind of price tag, most people opt to replace the whole engine instead, which keeps the market for used rotary engines surprisingly lively. Number 7. Subaru 2.5-liter turbo. This engine powers the likes of the WRX and Forester, and while it promised to deliver that sweet mix of power and efficiency, it also brought a heavy helping of, well, trouble. The head gasket failure is the star of the show here. Imagine getting excited for a road trip only to have your engine overheat faster than last time. This head gasket issue has been around since the early days of this engine, and it led to coolant leaking right into the cylinders. The result? Overheating, engine damage, and a repair bill that can easily climb above $1,500. And if that wasn't enough, there are issues with faulty piston rings and cylinder blocks, all of which spell more time in the shop and more money out of your wallet. Subaru tried to put a band-aid on this problem, calling it a service campaign, which sounds fancy but really involved pouring in some stop leak and hoping for the best. Spoiler alert, it didn't fix the root of the issue. They also tried to upgrade the gaskets in newer models, but the ghost of head gasket failures past still haunts these engines. It left drivers with a tough decision: keep repairing or cut losses. And honestly, this engine's track record makes it a prime candidate for our list of worst car engines that just don't last long. This engine was notorious for several critical failures, and most infamous being ring gland failures. The ring glands, essential for sealing the combustion chamber, often cracked under pressure, leading to loss of compression, power, and eventually catastrophic engine failure. This issue was particularly common in engines driven hard or modified, although stock vehicles were also not immune. Number 8. GM high-feature engine. Specifically the 2.8 and 3.6-liter models from 2007 to 2010. Now this thing has more issues than a newspaper subscription. You see, GM tried to get fancy with variable valve timing, which is just a complicated way of saying they made the engine as temperamental as a cat on a hot tin roof. The timing chain in this bad boy stretches out quicker than my waistband after Thanksgiving dinner. Now this engine is the opposite of lit. Unless you count your wallet going up in flames. If you ignore that rattle under the hood that's louder than my snoring, you're risking engine misfires and metal shavings turning your oil into a metallic smoothie. Trust me, that's a recipe nobody wants. And don't get me started on the repair costs. Shelling out $3,000 for a timing chain replacement? Worst case scenario, you're looking at a $7,000 bill for a new engine. Number 9. The Toyota 3.0-liter V6 engine. Notably, the 3VZE variant was featured in popular models like the Toyota 4Runner and Tacoma. Despite Toyota's reputation for reliability, this engine developed a reputation for several significant issues. One of the most prevalent problems with a 3.0-liter V6 engine is head gasket failure. Owners have reported head gasket issues occurring as early as 3 months after purchase. This problem was so widespread that Toyota extended the cylinder head gasket warranty coverage to 8 years or 100,000 miles. The design of the engine's crossover pipe contributes to overheating, particularly affecting the rear cylinder heads. In hotter climates, this can exacerbate the problem, leading to further engine damage. Another common issue is oil leakage, especially from the valve cover gaskets and front main seals. These leaks not only increase maintenance costs, but also diminish the engine's longevity. Due to these persistent issues, many owners have faced substantial repair bills, with some resorting to complete engine replacements. If you're considering purchasing a used Toyota equipped with this engine, it's crucial to ensure that all necessary repairs have been made or to explore alternative options. Number 10. GM 2.4-liter Quad 4. Intended as a breakthrough for cars like the Pontiac Grand Am and Buick Skylark, this engine seemed like a decent shot at a 4-cylinder, promising good performance and fuel efficiency for compact and mid-sized cars like the Oldsmobile Achieva and Pontiac Grand Am. But oh boy, did reality kick in hard. The Quad 4 became notorious for being a complete maintenance nightmare. Let's start with the head gasket, or as I like to call it, the Achilles heel of this engine. It had a habit of failing at the worst possible times, often leading to severe overheating and complete engine failure, leaving drivers stranded with repair bills that could make your wallet cry. The engine's high compression ratio and aluminum cylinder head made it prone to warping and cracking under heat, compounding its reliability problems. And if that wasn't enough, the timing chain, a pretty crucial part, wouldn't you agree, had a tendency to wear down way too fast. And if you didn't catch it in time, well, say goodbye to your engine. Then there was the excessive oil consumption. Drivers found themselves constantly pouring oil just to keep things running, which of course only added to the headaches. Excessive vibration, noise, and frequent oil leaks made driving uncomfortable and costly. Despite GM's attempts to address these flaws, the Quad 4 never overcame its bad reputation. Number 11. Pontiac 2.5-liter Iron Duke. This engine was all over the place in the 80s, powering everything from Pontiac Fieros to Chevrolet Citations. But no matter where you found it, it brought the same disappointing punch. The Iron Duke cranked out between 85 and 110 horsepower, which was barely enough to get those heavier GM vehicles moving. It's like giving a toddler a pair of weights and telling them to go run a mile. You're gonna get a lot of struggling and very little distance. This thing rattled so much that driving felt more like a carnival ride than a smooth cruise. If you're into that kind of shaky adventure, well, maybe this was the engine for you. But for most people, it was downright unpleasant. The Iron Duke had a notorious overheating problem. The early models had cylinder heads that cracked so often, owners were practically on a first-name basis with their local mechanics. Number 12. Chrysler 2.0-liter SOHC. If you thought the Iron Duke was bad, let me introduce you to an engine that redefines what it means to be problematic. We're talking about the Chrysler 2.0-liter SOHC engine, the kind you found in vehicles like the Dodge Neon and Plymouth Neon. Let's start with its infamous head gasket failures, which were so common they became almost like a feature rather than a flaw. And if you didn't catch it in time, you're looking at oil mixing with coolant, overheating, and a whole lot of expensive damage. Not exactly what you want in your daily driver, right? This wasn't a one-and-done issue either. Many owners faced multiple head gasket replacements in the lifespan of this engine. The oil leaks and the noisy operation only added to the frustration. It's like Chrysler just couldn't let you have a moment of peace with this engine. Despite all these issues, Chrysler kept the engine in production for over a decade. Yep, 10 years of head-scratching problems, constant repairs, and enough headaches to fill a medicine cabinet. If you had one of these engines, you probably spent more time under the hood than behind the wheel. Number 13. The Volkswagen 2.0-liter TSI. Now, you might recognize this one from some iconic rides like the GTI or the Audi A3. This baby has a fatal flaw that's left more drivers stranded on the side of the road than an overbooked tow truck. We're talking about the timing chain tensioner, the unsung hero that keeps everything running smoothly inside the engine. The tensioner in these engines is infamous for, well, just giving up. And when it does, it can send the timing chain slipping or even snapping altogether, which pretty much means a front row seat to an engine apocalypse. Bent valves, busted pistons, and even total engine failure. Trust me, that's the kind of drama you don't want on your morning commute. Volkswagen did eventually update the tensioner, but not before a lot of engines bit the dust. The problem was so widespread that it even led to a class action lawsuit in 2018. And that's just the start of it. The PCV valve, the intake flat motor, the diverter valve, you name it. This engine had a checklist of potential headaches. Number 14. GM 3.1-liter V6. This engine found its way into popular models like the Chevrolet Lumina, Pontiac Grand Prix, and Buick Regal. On paper, it seemed like a solid choice, but under the hood, it was a different story. One of the major pitfalls of a 3.1-liter V6 was its intake manifold gasket. GM opted for a composite plastic material for these gaskets, which couldn't handle the engine's thermal expansion and contraction. Over time, this led to deterioration, causing coolant to leak into the engine oil, which is a recipe for disaster. If left unchecked, this mix could result in overheating and severe engine damage. Many owners found themselves replacing these gaskets multiple times, turning a simple drive into a potential headache. The thorn in the side of this engine was the exhaust gas recirculation valve. Carbon buildup under the EGR valve often prevented it from closing properly, mimicking a vacuum leak. This led to a lean fuel mixture, rough idling, and misfires. Drivers frequently encountered misfire codes or EGR-related issues, making the driving experience less than smooth. As if that wasn't enough, the 3.1-liter V6 also suffered from camshaft rear main oil seal leaks. This issue resulted in oil leaks that could lead to low oil levels and potential engine damage if not addressed promptly. Number 15. 1.3-liter multi-jet diesel from Fiat. It's the GOAT of bad engines. And by GOAT, I mean greatest oil consumer of all time. Fitted into models from Alfa Romeo to Suzuki Swift, this little diesel managed to cause big headaches across the board. You think with so many cars sporting it, they'd have ironed out the kinks. But no, it's like they copied my grandma's meatloaf recipe. Keeps repeating on you in the worst way possible. The manufacturer recommended changing the oil every 30,000 miles. But trust me, this engine starts acting up way before that. Think 20,000 miles in, and you're already texting your mechanic more than your ex. And don't get me started on the timing chain that decides to break like it's on some kind of extended coffee break. During winter, this engine's got more drama than a reality TV show. Moisture condenses in the intake manifold, freezes overnight, and then you've got ice playing hide and seek in your combustion chamber. Next thing you know, you're looking at repairs that'll cost more than a year's worth of avocado toast, if that's still a thing. Number 16. Mitsubishi 3.0-liter V6. The engine that was supposed to be reliable, smooth, and efficient, but ended up being about as trustworthy as a used car salesman with a bad comb-over. Now, at first glance, this engine was a star. Smooth power delivery, decent performance, and found in cars like the Mitsubishi 3000 GT and Dodge Stealth. But once those miles started stacking up, this thing turns into an oil-guzzling nightmare. The culprit? The valve guide seals, which wear out way too early and start letting oil seep into the combustion chamber. You know what that means? Hello, blue smoke. Imagine rolling up to a stoplight only for your car to start belching smoke like an old chimney. Not a great look, especially when you're trying to keep that car looking slick. And it doesn't stop there. The valve cover gaskets are prone to leaking, and replacing them every 60,000 miles or so gets old real quick. And let's not even talk about the cam seals. They're notorious for needing replacement, which means a lot of labor just to get the timing right. Number 17. The 5.4-liter Triton made its grand entrance in 1997. Powering everything from F-150s to Lincoln Navigators. Imagine cruising along when suddenly, bam, a spark plug decides it's had enough and ejects itself straight out of the cylinder head. Yeah, that's not a fun day. And repairing it can set you back anywhere from $1,100 to $2,000, depending on how much of a mess it made. And that's just one of the countless headaches this engine likes to throw your way. Oil consumption is another biggie. This engine guzzles oil like a high school kid in an all-you-can-eat soda fountain. That means poor lubrication, leading to nasty carbon buildup. Want to figure out what's wrong? Well, diagnostics alone could start at $500 and end somewhere north of $2,000 if the problem's deep-rooted. Oh, and let's not forget the timing chain guide failures. It's a cheap part, sure, but getting to it? Labor-intensive and wallet-draining, with bills ranging from $1,000 to $2,000. It's enough to make even the toughest Ford fan throw in the towel. Number 18. The Yugo 1.1-liter inline-4 engine. A piece of machinery that will forever be remembered as one of the worst excuses for an engine in automotive history. Let me put it this way. The Yugo engine was like that unreliable friend who keeps making promises but never shows up. One of its biggest issues? The timing belt. Oh boy, if you didn't replace that sucker every 40,000 miles, it would happily destroy your engine. And this wasn't just any old issue. Because of the interference design, when the belt failed, you'd be left with a lovely mess of bent valves and a complete toast engine. It's like playing Russian roulette, except with your car's heartbeat. But it wasn't just the timing belt, my friends. The Yugo engine was riddled with problems that made driving it an exercise in patience. And maybe a little bit of masochism. Breakdowns are as common as gas fill-ups. Drivers found themselves stranded on the side of the road more often than they'd like to admit, probably wondering why they didn't just take the bus instead. And who could blame them? Even back in the day, public transportation seemed like the more sensible choice. Number 19. Triumph Stag V8. It's 1970, and Triumph wanted to make a splash, something to rival the likes of the Jaguar E-Type and Aston Martin DB5. They rolled out this beautiful beast called the Triumph Stag, but what they put inside it was, well, let's just say it was more of a lemon than a lion. The Triumph Stag V8 was a 3.0-liter engine built to impress, but boy, did it fall flat on its face. Biggest issue? Overheating. This thing overheated like it was a campfire on wheel. The cooling system was notoriously under-engineered, and that led to constant head gasket failures. If you know cars, you know a blown head gasket is basically the kiss of death. The overheating wasn't helped by some sloppy manufacturing either. Triumph sometimes cast sand right into the coolant passages. Yep, sand. It's like they want to make sure the coolant had a tough time doing its job. It wasn't your average front-mounted setup. Triumph decided to place it smack in the middle of the V on top of the engine. It was a bold move, but not a smart one. The pump had a nasty habit of giving out, and to top it off, it was higher than the radiator fill cap. That meant unless you parked the car on an incline, good luck getting enough coolant in there. The result? A lot of sad Stag owners stuck on the side of the road. Number 20. Ford 4.2-liter V8. Now, don't get me wrong. This thing was meant to pull like a workhorse. Ford put it in their F-150s and Econoline vans, hoping for a tough-as-nails engine. But what did we end up with? More like a high-maintenance diva. The biggest issue here? Coolant leaks. And not just the occasional drip you can shrug off. No, we're talking about leaks from those intake manifold gaskets that would sneak up on you until your engine's hotter than a summer day in Texas. That overheating led to misfires, and before you knew it, things got real expensive real fast. And let's not forget about those timing chain tensioners that love to give up the ghost. If you ignored these problems, well, you'd be looking at catastrophic engine failure. The kind that would make you wish you'd never left your driveway. Number 21. The Renault 2.0-liter DCI engine, particularly the M9R variant found in models like the Renault Laguna and Traffic, which has garnered attention for several reliability concerns. One notable issue is the diesel particulate filter, which can become clogged, especially during frequent short trips that prevent proper regeneration. This clogging hampers performance and increases emissions. Another common problem involves the turbocharger. Improper shutdowns can lead to overheating, causing oil to carbonize and potentially seizing the turbo bearings. Symptoms include unusual whistling noises or a sudden drop in power. The exhaust gas recirculation valve is also prone to failure. leading to decreased engine performance and increased emissions. Placing the EGR valve can be costly. Additionally, the timing chain in the M9R engine may stretch over time, which, if ignored, can result in catastrophic engine damage. Regular maintenance and timely replacement are crucial to prevent such issues. Number 22. Chevrolet 305 V8. It's got a habit of spilling oil like it's trying to make a mess on purpose. You'd get oil leaks from the valve covers and oil pan gaskets often enough, you'd start thinking they were a design feature. It wasn't just about keeping a bottle of oil handy. It was about stocking up like you're prepping for a doomsday scenario. And the issues didn't stop at the leaks. The engine suffered from poor airflow thanks to its small bore size, which left it struggling for power and efficiency. I mean, you're not exactly winning any drag races with this one, unless your idea of racing is seeing who can get to the grocery store the slowest. Another charm of the 305 was its valve train. The flat tappet camshaft was notorious for wearing out. This means that not only was it not particularly powerful to begin with, but over time, it lost even more of what little oomph it had. It's kind of like watching your grandpa try to run a marathon. He's trying his best, but it's just not what it used to be. Number 23. Hyundai 2.0-liter R. You know, the one they put in the Sonata, Santa Fe, and Kia Optima. On paper, this bad boy was supposed to give you a mix of decent power and respectable fuel efficiency. But in reality, well, let's just say if you're still driving one, you're probably carrying a jug of oil in your trunk just to make it through the week. Let's get into why it's such a headache. The real kicker here is the oil flow problem. Some leftover metallic debris from manufacturing has a nasty habit of blocking oil flow to the connecting rod bearing. Once that happens, the bearings wear out like they're in a high-speed chase. And guess what? They seize. You're suddenly dealing with a full-on engine meltdown. Not the kind of surprise anyone wants. And then there's the excessive oil consumption. It's like your car's drinking problem just gets worse and worse. Number 24. Saturn 1.9-liter L SOHC. This beauty was notorious for a couple of not-so-lovely quirks that made it one of the worst engines out there. Let's talk about oil consumption. And by consumption, I mean this engine guzzled oil like your Uncle Bob at a barbecue. Thanks to a flawed design, this engine had a habit of slurping up oil faster than most drivers could keep up with. Forget to top it off for a minute, and you're suddenly dealing with severe engine wear. The timing chain tensioner relied on that oil pressure, and without it, guess what? You're looking at a loose chain ready to wreak havoc. And if that wasn't enough, the timing chain failures often led to a catastrophic end, especially since we're dealing with an interference engine, meaning the pistons would love to make an unexpected introduction to the valves. Due to a casting defect, it was common to find engine oil mixing in the coolant, creating a delightful chocolate milkshake consistency. These issues meant expensive repairs and an engine that simply wouldn't last long. Now that's what I call a recipe for frustration. Number 25. The Rover K Series, which made its way into models like the Rover 200, MGTF, and even the Lotus Elise, and earned itself a reputation for one thing: head gasket failures. And when I say failures, I mean the kind that happen so often you might as well carry a spare head gasket in your glove box. Why? Because the design was plagued by a series of poor choices that made sure this engine was about as reliable as a paper umbrella in a thunderstorm. First off, they used plastic dowels to align the cylinder head instead of metal ones. Plastic, y'all. It's like trusting a toddler to hold your fishing line steady. It's gonna end badly. To make things worse, the thermostat was placed in a spot that pretty much guaranteed the aluminum head would get a thermal shock every now and then. It's like giving your engine a heart attack each time it heats up or cools down. All these factors combined meant that the head gasket was just waiting for an opportunity to blow, which often led to coolant mixing where it shouldn't, into the oil or the cylinders. Overheating, serious engine damage, and expensive repairs were practically written into the owner's manual for this bad boy. Number 26. Suzuki 1.0-liter 3-cylinder. The one you might recognize from models like the Suzuki Swift or Geo Metro. Now I know some of y'all might think, hey, that little engine should be economical, right? And you'd be right, in theory. But theory doesn't always meet reality. And with this engine, reality hits harder than my mama's slipper when I forgot to take the trash out. The 1.0-liter 3-cylinder was efficient, sure, but it had a habit of consuming oil like a hungry teenager at an all-you-can-eat buffet. The oil would just vanish, and if you weren't keeping a close eye on it, you'd find yourself in a heap of trouble. That low oil would lead to overheating, and then bam, a blown head gasket. Number 27. Ford 3.8-liter V6. You see, the 3.8-liter V6 had a special talent, and by special, I mean notorious, for blowing its head gasket. Ford used aluminum heads with a cast iron block, which sounds alright until you realize that these two metals expand at different rates. When the engine heats up, the aluminum and cast iron don't exactly cooperate, and that's where things go south. This constant push and pull puts a ton of stress on the head gasket, and guess what? The gasket just can't handle it. It's like asking a rubber band to hold back a tidal wave. Something's bound to give. And when it does, coolant leaks into the oil, leading to overheating, which often results in catastrophic engine failure. Imagine buying a car only for the engine to wave the white flag before even hitting 100,000 miles. Ford tried to redesign the gaskets, but even then, these engines had a habit of breaking hearts and bank accounts. Legal issues, service campaigns, costly repairs. It was like owning a money pit that always found new ways to disappoint. Number 28. 1.6-liter PSA. Better known as the Prince engine, which you'll find lurking under the hoods of cars like the Peugeot 207, Mini Cooper, Citroën C4, and more. This little guy, especially in those early models from 2006 to 2010, has left more car owners pulling their hair out than a toddler refusing to nap. This engine's timing system is a ticking time bomb. You know how you expect your car's timing chain to just do its thing, keeping everything smooth and synchronized? Yeah, well, not with this guy. Over time, the timing chain gets loose, which means your engine starts feeling more like it's throwing a temper tantrum than delivering smooth power. And don't even get me started on the turbocharged versions. Number 29. Alfa Romeo twin-spark 2.0-liter engine. Now, Alfa Romeo makes some gorgeous cars, no doubt about it. But if you're thinking about the twin-spark, especially the 2.0-liter version, you might want to think twice. It's one of those engines that can look all good on paper, but in reality, it's a ticking time bomb if not handled just right. These twin-spark engines are picky, almost like they woke up on the wrong side of the bed. You gotta warm them up properly. And I mean really baby him before you even think about pushing the gas pedal. Quick acceleration when it's still cold? Yeah, you might as well call it a day because that engine will leave you stranded. Plus, if you're not on top of those oil changes, and I mean high-quality oil, none of that cheap stuff, you're in for a world of hurt. And don't even get me started on the timing belt. You've got to change that thing every 35,000 miles or it's game over. Number 30. Ford 6.0-liter Power Stroke diesel engine. Produced from 2003 to 2007, it's known for several common issues: EGR cooler and valve failures. The exhaust gas recirculation system often experiences problems. The EGR cooler can crack, leading to coolant leaks into the intake system, which may cause white exhaust smoke. Additionally, the EGR valve can become clogged with soot, resulting in performance issues. Oil cooler clogging. The engine's oil cooler can become obstructed by debris, reducing its efficiency. This can lead to elevated engine temperatures and potential EGR cooler failures. Due to the engine's design, head gaskets are prone to failure, especially when the engine is subjected to high temperatures or increased pressure. This issue is often linked to the stretching of the factory-installed head bolts. The 6.0-liter Power Stroke fuel injectors can fail due to issues like oil contamination or electrical problems, leading to rough idling, misfires, or starting difficulties. The variable geometry turbocharger in this engine is susceptible to sticking due to soot buildup, which can cause performance problems and reduce fuel efficiency. So did we miss anything? Have you had any experience with any of the engines we mentioned? Leave your comments down in the comment section below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe buttons, and we'll see you in the next video.